Two men walked into a Boston museum dressed as police officers. They did not smash a window. They were simply let inside. For the next 81 minutes, they moved through the galleries almost undisturbed. When they finally left, 13 works of art were gone, worth 500 million. The disappearance has lasted for decades. How do you hide something everyone is searching for? The empty frames are still here, hanging where the missing works once stood as physical reminders. This was not an ordinary gallery. Its objects had been assembled as a permanent collection. To understand how 13 objects vanished, we must go back to Boston, March 18, 1990. Inside, two night guards watched an outdated security system. The final barrier was always human. Then the intercom activated. Two men outside said they were police officers. The guard made the decision the entire robbery depended on. He released the lock. No window shattered. No alarm had to be defeated. The two men simply walked inside. At first, they behaved like officers. Then, they moved the guard away from his controls. Within moments, the disguise had done its job. The first guard was quickly restrained. The second guard was brought back into the same trap, completely unaware of the threat. Both men were taken downstairs and secured in the dark basement. Above them, the monitors kept running. The alarms still existed. But response was impossible. The thieves had crossed the only barrier that mattered. Now, the clock was running. With the guards restrained downstairs, the thieves moved into the galleries, undetected. In the Dutch room, they targeted Rembrandt, Vermeer, and other priceless masterpieces. Then, the choices became hard to understand. They took an ancient Chinese vessel. They spent 5 minutes carefully stealing a tiny, almost insignificant Rembrandt etching. In the short gallery, they added small drawings and a bronze eagle finial. Downstairs, they targeted Manet's Chez Tortoni, ignoring other valuable works nearby. After 81 minutes, they drove into the Boston night, leaving a massive mystery. By morning, 13 objects were missing. The number alone hides how strange the collection was. One was Vermeer's The Concert, a painting so famous, public display is nearly impossible. Another was Rembrandt's only known seascape, the storm on the Sea of Galilee. A second major Rembrandt portrait disappeared from the very same room. But then, the pattern breaks. The thieves also took a small Rembrandt etching. 5 delicate works on paper by Degas were taken from the short gallery. An ancient bronze, a small eagle finial, and a classic cafe portrait also vanished. If this was for the most expensive art, the list makes no sense. The strangest part of the robbery may not be what they took, but what they chose to leave. They had access to rooms filled with important art, yet their path was highly selective. They took major works, but also a tiny Rembrandt etching that required time to remove. They lifted an ancient Chinese bronze vessel from a table, shifting focus away from paintings. In another gallery, they took a small Napoleonic eagle, showing a strange attention to detail. Perhaps the thieves entered with specific targets already in mind. But the evidence doesn't prove that. At 8:15 that morning, police finally reached the two guards. Upstairs, the museum had become a crime scene. But almost everything was still there. And between them, 13 precise absences. The motion detectors preserved fragments of the thieves' path. But the surveillance recording from that night had been taken. Investigators could reconstruct parts of what happened. What happened next was another problem. Images of the missing works could be circulated. The art world could learn what to watch for. But a painting does not have to enter a legitimate market. It can be hidden. The trail inside the museum was measured in minutes. Outside it, the trail disappeared. As the physical trail faded, investigators entered a much less reliable, human-driven world. Informants, criminal networks, and private conversations became the new focus of this investigation.
We have a problem.
The stolen paintings were far too famous to sell on the legitimate art market. Outside that legal market, a masterpiece easily becomes simple collateral or a bargaining chip. Years later, the FBI stated the thieves were connected to an active criminal organization. The stolen artworks had moved southwest, through Connecticut, and straight into the Philadelphia region. But learning who handled the stolen pieces does not lead directly to their recovery. The investigation moved closer to the people, but the paintings remained completely lost to time. Then the investigation acquired an enemy no detective could question: time. Years became decades. Investigators changed. Witnesses aged. Memories became less certain. Connections faded away. Information that once seemed promising became harder to verify as the years passed. A person has to keep living. They need money, homes, and relationships. But a painting needs none of them. It can simply wait, unseen. It does not need a passport, a bank account, or to answer. The people changed, but inside the museum, the empty frames are still there. The Gardner case may actually contain two different crimes. The first lasted 81 minutes. Two men entered, removed the masterpieces, and drove away. Then a second story began. Who received the art? Who hid it? Who knew and chose not to speak? The robbery was simple, but keeping the art hidden for decades was another problem. The robbery ended in 1990. The disappearance never did. Today, visitors still walk through these rooms. The paintings that survived remain on the walls. And so do the empty frames. They were never filled with replacements. They remain as placeholders for works the museum still hopes will come home. More than 3 decades later, the frames are still waiting. Thyatine works are still missing. Where would you hide a painting the entire world knows is stolen?